hope you guys can hear me. My name is Sunny Aggarwal. I'm one of the co-founders of Osmosis. But you might be wondering why I'm wearing chainmail. It's because today we're not going to be talking about Osmosis. We're going to be talking about mesh security. Did I lug this across 2 continents for that one-line joke? Yes, I did. Should I have practiced giving a 30-minute talk wearing a 40-pound suit of armor? Probably. Did I? No. But we'll see how it goes. I have some osmosis liquidity in case I need it. But yeah, so mesh security. Before we jump into mesh security, let's talk a little bit about networks. So this is a meme, I would say, I saw on Twitter about 2 years ago. And it always really spoke to me. It was like, if you put these network structures onto the political compass graph, you have your authoritarian systems to libertarian, your economic left to economic right. Bucky just talked a bunch about political economic systems, and I think it's actually a good model to think about network structures. So, we have a question in front of us. We're trying to design the interchain. How do we want to design it? Well, we can look for inspiration to the biggest network alive today, which is the internet. So this is a quote that I really like. It's by David Clark. I think it might be my pinned tweet, actually. But it's David Clark. He was the chief protocol architect of the internet, which is such a dope title. But he has this quote that I really like, which is, "We reject kings, presidents, and voting. We believe in rough consensus and running code." So look, if we're rejecting kings and presidents, that means we can't be building towards these centralized hub and spoke systems with centralized points of failure. We need to be building mesh systems, right? And that leads us to 2 options. We have to either be building these green systems or the yellow systems. So, we've actually learned how to build green systems, and we've got pretty good at it. We have to use these things we call consensus protocols. And we've invented a couple of consensus protocols over the millennia, some more recent, like Tendermint BFT consensus, some older, like democracy. But the thing is, these green systems don't scale very well. They require n-squared communication. So, anyone who's familiar with the Tendermint consensus protocol understands this. Democracy, when I'm talking about democracy, I mean true democracy. This is from a picture from the canton of Appenzell-Innerrhoden in Switzerland, where they do open-air democracy 4 times a year. And how they solve the n-squared communication problem is they have a synchronous communication system, which is line of sight, right? But this doesn't scale. And we knew this when we were designing Cosmos, that this doesn't scale. So how did we account for this? We knew we wanted green systems of local sovereignty, but we needed a way to have these interoperate and scale. And so we basically invented this thing called IBC, a system to allow green subsystems to talk to each other. And it works. But now we're left with the question, what is the meta topology of the system going to look like? Is it going to be this red hub and spoke system? I don't think so, right? If it is, this is what Polkadot is building with their parachains. Ethereum is building this with their rollups. If we just end up recreating this in Cosmos, I think the entire Cosmos experiment was a waste of time. We didn't really accomplish anything. We need to be building mesh systems. So, okay, maybe we end up building a green system, right? There's this crazy idea, can we run Tendermint consensus over IBC? And we have this meta Tendermint. And I think it could work. This is a bad mic. Okay. It's just going to hang. Oh, so much better. Wow. Okay. Yeah, so we're going to run this green system of, we could do this. But if you look, thank you. But if you look at the quote, right? We reject kings and presidents. We also reject voting. Because, and these green systems, they require these like voting systems to work. And we know that voting systems work, but they don't work at internet scale. They don't work at interchain scale. So we're kind of, rough consensus. That's what we have to rely on. And that means we're basically left with these yellow systems. That is the way to scale the interchain. And, you look at these yellow systems, it's actually what we've actually created over the last 2 years, right? We have this very mesh network design of interchain communication where every chain connects to the chains that it wants to talk to. It's not not end-to-end communication, right? Because not all chains need to talk to all other chains. So this is cool. This is valid for interchain communication. How does this apply to security? So to look at that, let's look at some real-world security meshes. So what is the greatest security system in the world probably? It's probably the NATO alliance, right? And what is NATO? NATO is a network of sovereign nation states that have a mutual defense pact, right? They all have their own internal policies. They don't meddle in each other's internal affairs. But the famous Article 5 says if any one of them is attacked, they all rush to each other's defense. And basically the world is secured by this mesh network of security alliances that has basically kept the world extremely safe on the scale of human timescales, extremely safe for the last 100 years. And we can use this when we think about interchain security. So let's walk through the stages of interchain security and where the ideas are today, and then where mesh security comes in. So I'm going to provide this key. So if there's a hexagon, that's a blockchain. A circle is a validator set. And an arrow pointing from the validator set to the hexagon that means that validator set validates that blockchain. So if we have sovereign blockchains, you have the Cosmos Hub has its own validator set, Atom holders, securing it. Osmosis has its own validator set, Osmo, securing it. We can have interchain security v1, which is the Atom holders, the validator set of the Cosmos Hub, fully validates another blockchain, let's say something like Neutron. And this, as you add more chains, it turns into this hub and spoke system. But really, this is not that different than a block size increase, right? There's some benefits because you have some parallelization going on, but you have the same validators sort of validating just more and more chains. There's not really any sovereignty going on here. We have the V2, which is the idea that, hey, a subset of the Cosmos Hub validators can choose to validate a new chain. Let's call this one Electron. And this is cool because, what it is in other crypto ecosystems, we call this idea sharding, right? And this is nice because it's more scalable. You don't have to use governance every time you want to add a new chain into the system. But, it's still no sovereignty going on here. Where things get really interesting is when we move towards interchain security v3. Interchain security v3 is the idea that Osmosis can have its own sovereign validator set defined by Osmo staking, but its security can get augmented by security it gets from the Cosmos Hub, from Atom stakers. And this is actually really interesting, because when you expand this out to more chains, you get actual sovereignty in each chain. Each chain has its own validator set and token holder set that defines its system. But this design right now is still a red hub and spoke system, right? How do we fix this? It's simple. We take the ideas of interchain security v3, but you run them bidirectionally, right? Yes, Osmosis can be a consumer chain and get security from the Cosmos Hub, but can also be a provider chain and lend security to the Cosmos Hub at the same time. And really, what's going to happen is all these chains, all Cosmos chains, are going to be both provider and consumer chains. Osmosis is going to provide security to Juno and Cosmos Hub. Juno will provide security to the Cosmos Hub and Osmosis. It's going to be this mesh network of security. So how does this actually work? How is this actually going to be built out? So, people may have seen this graph that I tweeted out a couple weeks ago, or a week ago. And it's really cool. What it does is shows the overlap of validator sets between chains. So just really quick, I want to give a huge shout out to Numia. Numia is a new, they're a new data provider infrastructure in the ecosystem, and they're building a lot of cool stuff. So they helped me a lot with this data, and a lot of the data came from MintScan. So obviously, a huge shout out to them as well. But this data, I don't know. I'll share this Excel sheet later. I think it's such a fascinating data set to explore. But some people ask hey, isn't this a bad thing? Doesn't this mean there's a lot of centralization in the validator sets? And I see this as no, this is a good thing. This means there's very high overlap in the communities and stakeholder sets of all these Cosmos chains. And we should be taking advantage of that. So for example, 75% of Osmosis validators are also running validators on Juno, while 72% of Juno validators are also running validators on Osmosis. This is really cool. So how would we take advantage of this in the system? We use something called, before that, I'd say we actually do have something I'd call soft shared security today already. What does that mean? If a bunch of validators did something malicious on Juno, or let's say on Axelar, stole a bunch of money, are you telling me we're not going to use governance to slash them anyways? Of course we will, right? And I think it's this social norm that's unspoken rule. And what we should be doing is taking this concept and actually, instantiating it in the code, using this concept called cross-staking. So how cross-staking works is, imagine a validator like Notional. They're running validators on both Osmosis and Juno. What they can do is they can submit transactions on both these chains and correlate their identity across both of these chains. And what will happen then by correlating identity is if they do something malicious on Osmosis, let's say produce a toxic block, they're going to get slashed on both chains, right? And so this means that they're putting their risk up. But why are they going to do this? Well, you can use IBC to send the information about cross-staking to both chains. Both chains know that that stake is being cross-staked, and it can give a boost in staking rewards. And this will economically incentivize validators to correlate identities across chains. This is really cool. This means that if enough, that big graph where we had with all the validators overlap, if all of those validators actually started cross-staking, both Osmosis and Juno would be having so much more economic security than they would have both individually. One question that we often get is, hey, doesn't this lead to validator centralization? Doesn't this, let's say you have two validators, Notional and Figment. They both run on Osmosis, but Notional is cross-staked on Juno. They get this boost in staking rewards. You have a delegator, Amelia, who comes along. She has the choice of picking who to delegate to. Obviously, she's going to delegate to the validator that's cross-staked on both, so she can get more staking rewards, and this will lead to validator centralization. How do we solve this? We have to stop. In staking in general, we have to stop thinking of validators as the fundamental unit when designing mechanisms. We always have to treat delegators and stakers as the fundamental unit. So what will happen is Amelia will go ahead and stake her Osmo, and she'll choose a validator to delegate to. So let's say she delegates to Figment on Osmosis. What we can do as a nice UX feature is we can have it so it automatically cross-stakes to any other chain that Figment is also validating on. But the key is that she can also cross-stake to a different validator on a different chain. So she can say, hey, Figment's not actually validating on Juno, so I'm going to use my Osmo power to cross-stake to Notional on Juno. And now, if Notional does anything malicious, her Osmo gets slashed and still provides economic security to all of these chains at the same time. Another common question we get is, wouldn't another chain's validator set be able to just completely overtake yours? So imagine, Binance, one of the biggest validators on the Cosmos Hub. If it was the only validator to cross-stake on a really small chain, wouldn't it be able to just, take over that chain with 67%? The solution is that chains have to make decisions when entering cross-staking relationships with other chains and choose how much to cap the voting power they get. So let's say Osmosis wants to cap the cross-staking voting power that Atom holders can get on Osmosis to 10%. So as more Atom starts to get cross-staked to Osmosis, the voting power goes up and up. But once it hits the cap of 10%, more Atom can keep getting cross-staked, but it dilutes the voting power that every Atom gets to cap it at 10%. So there's more economic value continuing to be cross-staked on Osmosis, but it's not actually increasing the voting power that Atom holders have on the system. And that's a way of ensuring the sovereignty of each system. And it doesn't give that one-to-one voting power, which makes sense. We don't want, if you want to be maximally exposed to Osmosis, you should be staking Osmo, not cross-staking Atom. The cross-staking Atom is a like nice to have, and it's a something that comes out of these bilateral treaties. But you should still be incentivized to stake the tokens for the chains that you are most bullish on, right? And like Osmo holders would still be the ones capturing the MEV revenue and getting to choose the block proposers and things like that. So how will chains choose which other chains to cross-stake with? So one thing we can do is look at the economic basis of mesh security. So if you look at going back to NATO, right, only 4 EU countries are not part of the NATO alliance. And what this shows is countries that have high levels of economic integration want to have high levels of security relationships because these things are very intertwined. And so, we can learn from this in how cross-staking will work as well. If we look, let's look at something like Axelar and Osmosis, right? Osmosis currently makes up about 70% of Axelar's TVL, while 4 out of the top 10 assets on Osmosis are bridged via Axelar. Obviously, there's like very high economic interdependency here, and obviously, it is in the interest of both of these chains to cross-stake with each other. Axelar is launching their token in, this week, and so as it shifts to proof of stake, it is in the incentive of Osmosis to make sure that the Axelar chain also has the full security of Osmo backing it as well to protect that bridge. Another example is something like Osmosis and Mars, right? Osmosis and Mars were sort of effectively building this joint leverage trading product together, very economically interdependent products. Of course, we're going to want to do some sort of cross-staking and have high levels of security and economic interdependency. In fact, we have such high economic interdependency that we're throwing this dank-ass party tonight that you should all come to. So, what's interesting is that, we look at this IBC mesh network of communication and economic throughput, and, we're going to see that security relationships are going to start to match the economic relationships that we see today. And I will show a little osmosis here, where obviously which chain in Cosmos do all chains have high levels of economic interdependency on, right? Like Osmosis is the primary DEX for Juno. It's the primary DEX for Evmos. Evmos is like almost a top 50 asset with not being listed on a single centralized exchange, so that's so cool. And we actually had this idea before. This isn't new. If people remember last Cosmoverse, we talked about this idea called interfluid staking, right? And what was interfluid staking? Interfluid staking was this idea that, Alice superfluid staked her LP shares on Osmosis, but we can use IBC to send that to another chain and give her voting power on the other chain. If you think about this, all interfluid staking is cross-staking applied to superfluid staking, right? And so, what's really cool is liquidity will be an important basis of how security forms in the future. And so, interfluid staking, mesh security, coming soon to an interchain near you. I think Jake, Ethan Fry, and I, we're going to try to hack on a MVP at HackWasm this weekend. So, woo! Yeah, so, let's say no to kings, presidents, and voting, and let's build yellow, rough consensus mesh network systems. So, thank you.